All right, so, oh, Aaron's locked out outside. Okay. So you may be asking yourself, like, why are we learning two languages, right? Maybe it was important to you. Maybe when you were looking for different boot camps, you were looking for places that taught multiple languages. And I think by the end of this particular cohort, you're going to know, let's see, Ruby, JavaScript, HTML, CSS, SQL, Bootstrap. You probably know somewhere in the vicinity of like 6 languages or so, and you're definitely going to know 3 different frameworks in Ruby and JavaScript. So you're going to learn quite a bit of stuff. I guess, why do you think it's important to learn more than one thing?
Because certain languages may have limitations that other languages can compensate.
Yep, that is definitely one thing. So yeah, can you guys hear his answers, or do I have to repeat?
No.
You can't hear his answer. So Raymond said, was it one more time, and I'll repeat.
Certain languages may have limitations that other languages may be stronger.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. So every single language, most programming languages that have made it to today and have some sort of a following are beneficial in some way. Some languages are faster than others. Some languages are slower than others. I know I met one of the original developers who worked on Twitter before it became Twitter. He says that Ruby was able to handle like database calls of like 200 hits a second. And I was like, wow, that's pretty good. And he goes, but once we got to more and more users, it's hitting, like our database is getting hit much more than 200 times a second. We're talking 10,000, 20,000, up to 50, 100,000 times a second. So he's like, we couldn't use Ruby anymore at that point because Ruby's just not fast enough. We had to end up using a language like Java, which is much faster than Ruby. But developing apps in Java for lean, small startups today is the learning curve's much higher. So different languages have different strengths and different weaknesses. So that's definitely one of the big things. Another thing is you're most likely not going to be working in the first language that you learn. So when you leave here, there is a person, your Thursday night TA, his name is Darnell. His first language was JavaScript. He's working in C++. Those are completely opposite ends of the spectrum. But all of the things that you're learning in these languages are more or less, like the concepts are more or less the same. The syntax is different, but the concepts are going to be the same. Yeah, we're trying to make it so that you're not terribly scared of learning new things. If you get stuck in one language and you're scared of other languages, you're most likely not going to make it in development. So I've worked in Ruby for 4 years. So I'm like pretty good at Ruby, but I've had to learn JavaScript along the way. And if I don't, then I'm going to be pretty much walking myself out the door in about 5 years' time. Even though it won't hurt today, in about 5 years when I only know one thing, I'm kind of screwed. So the main point I'm trying to make is when we learn JavaScript and when we learn Ruby, or when you learn Python or whatever else, like all the concepts are almost identical. And the only things that's really changing is just a little bit of syntax. It's just small little syntactical things. Okay, so today we're going to talk a little bit about Ruby. So first things first, what does the top say? Like, what is that bang symbol? Not. Yep. So remember that bang symbol, that exclamation point just means not equals, like the opposite of. So Ruby and Ruby on Rails are not the same thing. Car and carpet aren't the same thing. Java and JavaScript aren't the same thing. Ruby and Ruby on Rails are not the same thing. Ruby is the actual programming language. It's very simple to use. It's very elegant. Like when you read it, it's going to read very much like English. It's not programming, like hardcore programming language in the ones that you think of. When you talk about Rails, Rails is the framework that's written on top of Ruby. So Ruby has to come first because that's the language, and then the framework that comes on top of it is called Rails. Similarly, like Python is a language, and their framework is Django. I don't know what the one is for Java. Spring, I think it is. So Java, yeah. So like Java is the language, and Spring is the framework. And the framework is just thousands of lines of code that someone wrote in that particular language. In our case, it's going to be Ruby, to make your life easier. Let's continue on. So this particular person, his name is Mats, shortened down. His nickname is Mats. He wrote this in 1992, kind of like as a toy. Like he was just really sick of writing like PHP and very verbose languages. So in his free time, he started creating this toy language called Ruby. Looks like English, reads a lot like English, and he wanted to make it very object-oriented because that was starting to become a really big thing, object-oriented programming. Remember in Ruby that everything in Ruby down the road is just an object. Today, Mats works at a company called Heroku, which is like an online hosting platform for your particular app. So I found it kind of interesting. If a developer ever has issues with Ruby, they can just walk over down the hall and talk to the person who created it. It's kind of interesting. All of the arithmetic operators are they're completely identical to JavaScript, right? So we have basic things like addition, subtraction, multiplication, exponents, I think, are the same thing in JavaScript, correct? JavaScript, yeah.
Never use it.
Yeah.
Yes.
But these all look familiar to you, right? That's the main point I'm trying to make. These are all familiar to you. All of these arithmetic operators are exactly the same between Ruby and between JavaScript. When it comes to variables, this is where it starts to get just a little bit different. So again, variables, all they do is they just store values. When we talk about variables inside of JavaScript, we have like let and constant, things of that nature. When we talk about variables inside of Ruby, it's just, there's no let and const, it's just declare it equals something else. And now, remember, all of your variables are going to be snake case. We talked about a little bit about this yesterday. So it's going to be variable underscore name. So each new word is going to have a space. Like each new word usually has a space in regular English. Inside of Ruby, it's going to have an underscore. Remember, everything is going to be case sensitive, and capitalization is going to count. We're going to deal with this in just a little while next week. Data types are the same thing inside of Ruby and inside of JavaScript. We can use single or double quotes. We have single or doubles. I'm generally telling people, if you want to interpolate something, meaning like you have a variable and you want to shove that variable inside of a string, use double quotes. Otherwise, only use single quotes to prevent, to help out other developers as they're reading. Yep, interpolation is this next thing. So inside of JavaScript, it looks a little bit different, but inside of Ruby, it's just a hashtag with an open curly brace, whatever your variable is, and then closing curly brace, and it has to be in double quotes. Your numbers remain the same. Your Booleans remain the same. Floats still mean decimal. Everything's still the same here. Comments are a little bit different inside of, what's the command to, what do you put in order to write a comment inside of JavaScript?
//
Yeah, 2 forward slashes. Inside of Ruby, it's hashtags. That's all. Printing and getting stuff, like we had to use like prompts and install a library, and it was a big disaster inside of JavaScript. With Ruby, it's pretty simple. It's just gets. I'm just going to get something. Get stands for get string. I'm going to get something from your user. And the same thing, if you want to put something out to the screen, like print something, you can type in print. You can type in puts. What's the equivalent of print and puts inside of JavaScript? Console log, yeah. So again, they do the same thing. It's just small, little, minute differences.
John, I got a question.
Yeah.
The hash to comment.
Yep.
The forward slash.
Mm-hmm.
Is that where hashtags come from, like Twitter?
I don't know the answer to that question.
Okay. Yeah, off topic.
Yeah, I
think so.
it's possible.
I have a question.
Mm-hmm.
In terms of libraries, you don't include libraries in this language. They are already included.
Yeah, so the question was, we have JavaScript, they have many different libraries. Where are the libraries for Ruby? We'll get to that tomorrow, in a couple of days. But they're called Ruby gems, because Ruby is a gem and they want to be cutesy, So they're called Ruby gems. They also have a bunch of libraries, and you need to include them externally if you want to use them. So same thing as JavaScript. your logical operators all pretty much remain the same. You know, instead of triple equals for JavaScript, you just have double equals. That's the only thing that's different. Not equals, instead of bang equals equals, it's just bang equals. You're greater than, you're less than, you're greater than or equal to. Everything more or less remains the same. So again, yeah, just like some of the differences, I'm going to open up two things side by side.
There's no decrement and increment like plus plus, right? It's just plus equals 1.
Yep. Yeah. So I'm going to have my JavaScript on this side. I'm going to have my Ruby on this side. So if I'm just like declaring a variable inside of JavaScript, just say, let's do, we're just going to call it first name. So what would I type? Yep. Remember, we're doing let and const. What's the difference between let and const?
But you can change
Yep. So, I mean, var will always still work. People will definitely know what you're talking about, but we want to try to keep up with the times. So lar first name equals John. Is this correct? Everything looking good here?
No,
What's that?
No, it's not camel case.
It has to be camel case, yep. And then in Ruby, if I were to do the same thing, it's just first name equals John. So it's a little bit like, I think it's a little bit simpler. So other people don't really like that as much. It just depends on what you prefer. So this is the difference between a variable declaration inside of JavaScript, inside of Ruby. Again, they do exactly the same things, small little syntactical differences, and you just have to kind of memorize that as you go along. One's camel case, because it's humped like a camel. Another one's snake case, because it's long and low to the ground.
So like for hotel Platoon, you might be using variables as something different. It's just always changing.
It doesn't change a lot each year, but this was like the first major change. This came out in 2015, and it's just starting to get adopted now. So that's like the agreed upon, like we're starting to move in that direction, but that was still 3 years ago, and there's just starting to move in that direction.
But the languages in general, like they never get complacent.
It's always changing. Every single year they add things and they remove things. For Ruby, it gets updated on Christmas every single year. So like last year we were dealing with 2.4. That's what Bravo Platoon was using. You guys are using 2.5. That's just what it is. Let's create a method called say hello or something. We're going to create a method called say hello, and you give it a phrase, and it says it to you. This is going to be pretty simple inside of JavaScript, so somebody tell me what to type here. Remote? Anybody?
function, or you can do the lambda expression.
Let's do the fat arrow.
Fat arrow.
Yep.
You do variable or let, whatever it is. Whatever the name is going to be. Say hello.
Let's say hello. Good.
Capital H.
Okay.
And it's going to be equals parentheses. In the parentheses, you're going to be taking in a variable called phrase.
Okay.
And that arrow, curly back brackets.
Okay. And then if I wanted to if I wanted to print this out to the screen and interpolate this phrase, what would that look like?
Also one phrase.
Okay. Let's see if this one works. I'm going to grab this. Actually, I'm just going to save this real quick. I'll put it onto my desktop. I'll call this example.js, and I'll call this one example.rb. All right, let's see what happens. I'm going to call say hello right here.
That's what an RB.
Hi. Okay, works well. What if I want to say like some sort of hello phrase, and then I want to put the word there. Would this work?
No.
No. Okay. How do I interpolate things?
Concatenate there in quotes.
I don't want to concatenate because that's the old school way of doing things. We can actually fully interpolate it.
Dollar sign,
All right, I have a dollar sign,
curly brace
curly brace.
around the phrase.
Okay. Anything else?
Take marks for backticks.
Yep, backticks. So let's see if this works. So inside of backticks, I have a dollar sign for interpolation, and I say hi there. Let's see if this works. Note example, hi there. It's pretty simple. It's a small little program inside of JavaScript. Now we're going to do the same thing inside of Ruby. So for this one, I'm just going to kind of walk us through. To declare a function inside of JavaScript, we had to type in like var, like we had function whatever, or this fat arrow. This determines that it's a function. For us here, it's just def. I'm going to do def say hello. I'm defining the method called say hello, and then I have an end. So everything between the def and the end here is what is like the main meat of your function. Similarly, everything between the opening curly brace and the closing curly brace is what defines your function. And I'm just going to say, what was the thing to console log? What's the equivalent of console log inside of Ruby?
Puts.
Sure, I could do puts. We have puts, and then I want to interpolate. Does anybody remember off the top of their head how to interpolate?
Hashtag curly.
Hashtag curly brace. Okay, I'm sorry, I have to take a argument here. I'll call this phrase. Hashtag curly braces. I'll just do phrase there. You can kind of see very, very, very similar. So I'm going to do say hello of hello. And the command is not node anymore, but how do I run a Ruby file? Ruby example.rb. And just says hello there, and it exits the program. So again, I don't want people to get terribly scared when we start working with Ruby and JavaScript and we're switching back and forth, because most of the time you can kind of see it's very, very small, very, very small differences that we have here. Like I'm going to, just going side by side, the comments are a little bit different. The variable declaration is just a little different. This is how we create functions inside of JavaScript. This is how we create functions, methods inside of Ruby. This is how we invoke them in both of them. It's just small little syntactical differences, but fundamentally they do the same thing. I don't want people to get too scared with that. How do you all feel? Remote, you feel okay?
I have a really weird question. In Ruby and in web development, are people calling it hash? Because I come from a bunch of old school people who like make fun of anybody who says hash sign, like they all want to say pound sign. So is it common to say hashtag, or what's the word for that?
Pound, you can say hashtag. Yeah, it's really up to you. I don't. It's not going to make or break an interview in any way. It's just kind of like personal preference, depending on what generation of tech.
Okay, yeah, because from where I'm from, it's so old generational that anybody who says hashtag gets like kind of marred immediately.
You could say pound sign. I say hashtag personally, because that's how I see it.
I had call me out for saying GIF, and he says correct pronounce is GIF.
Oh, okay.
John.
Mm-hmm.
Could you said instead of puts, could you have used print or?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely, yeah. I can do print as well. Print or P. Those two are two different things. Now let's take a look at what that difference kind of looks like. So I'm going to run Ruby example. And hello there. I don't really like that too much. So the difference between print and print simply puts things out to the screen and doesn't care about any sort of spacing afterwards. That's why this ugly thing, that's why my command prompt shows up right away. Whereas when I did puts, it's put string. So it's put, like it puts it out to the screen. and then it adds a new line. So that's why I have this extra line right underneath so it reads more easily. But every single time I run Ruby example, it's still going to run like this because it's simply printing it out to the screen, and then it doesn't care what happens next. It just kind of comes out like this. When I change this with puts, it's just saying like at the very end, add a new line because that's probably what you want. So you can kind of see when I ran it this time, it added an extra line, and then the next thing printed out. Yeah. So you have 3 ways of doing it: puts, print, and p. 7 and 8 are synonymous. Take your pick. It doesn't really matter.
I always write prints and I wonder why I'm getting an error.
Yeah. So it's puts, print, and p. These two are identical. One's just a shortened version of the other one. All right, I'm going to talk quickly about JavaScript collections. What are collections? Anybody have an idea of what collections are?
Like an array, a group of objects, but you can numerically represent them. Collection could be a bunch of controls on a form, objects on a web. It could also be generic. You build a collection, adding items to it.
If you had to summarize it for like a 5-year-old, what would you say a collection is? Michael?
A group of related items.
Yeah, it's just like maybe it's just like a group of stuff, group of data, something,
Okay.
some sort of group of anything. All right, so once this loads up, you can kind of see how dated this is.
Cool.
Yeah, when I used to work there, yeah. All right, so I'm going to talk quickly about arrays, then we'll talk about hashes, and then we'll talk about how to use them inside of JavaScript, and then we'll get on with our day. We'll start working on these challenges and applying all of those Ruby skills that we have. So, quick introduction into arrays, just to make sure that everyone's on the exact same page. An array is basically a type of data structure. Other data structures include like strings and booleans and integers. The official definition, according to the Ruby docs, is it's an ordered integer index collection of any object. It's an ordered arrangement, according to dictionary.com, and it just looks like inside a square bracket some list of stuff. I don't know about you, but I am not one person who can understand ordered integer index collections of any object. It doesn't make any sense to me. So what is it really? It's just an ordered list. It's just a list that's in order, that's going to stay in order every single time. It's a container with a fixed location or something like that. Like I talked yesterday about the pillboxes. If you are forgetful and you don't know which pills to take, and you drop like a bunch of pills on the floor, you're kind of screwed because it's not in a collection, right? But if you are someone who has all of their pills inside of a pillbox like this every single day, and the pillbox falls to the floor and hopefully everything stays intact, you're okay. It's like instead of taking all of the stuff like in a giant pile, I'm ordering it so that it stays in a particular order. The things that I put in on Sunday when I open it, it's still going to be those Sunday pills. When I open up my Wednesday stuff, it's always going to be my Wednesday pills if I do it correctly. The contents of each location are unique to that particular location.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Where in memory do those locations? Are those like flash memory, or like basically those get saved to a flash?
I will cover that in a later lecture when we talk about heaps and things like that. Yeah, we'll talk about that in just a bit. Another question that people have is kind of like, we have these data structures called arrays. Why are they particularly useful? And the big thing about arrays is like it's not an especially it's not especially fast or anything like that. If you were to search like a very large group of data, like 1 million records or something like that, and you're like, give me the, like, I want you to like iterate over all of those things, like it takes way too long. It's not the most efficient way of doing things. But the thing that you can use arrays for is that the list order never changes. So whatever list order that you declared the first time and you alter things, like you can rely on that being there every single time. So if I had like a list of 1 through 5, every single time I type array, it's going to give me 1 through 5, 1 through 5, 1 through 5. Like you can always reliably wait on that to give you the same data.
And this is Ruby.
This is in all languages.
Okay.
Yeah.
Are there vectors
In Ruby, I have, if there are, I have never used them. Cool. All right, so like let's say like in terms of like a real world example, you're a business owner and you want to see what the first purchase of your of the store was of the day and the last purchase of the store. If you saved it inside of an array, you would always be able to tell what it is because the first thing that gets put inside your array is always going to be at index 0. And then everything else after that is always going to be in that particular order. So you can always reliably wait on that. Yeah, that's a good one. So inside of Ruby, it's like, how do I create an array? There's 2 ways of doing it. Easiest one is just is this bottom one right here. Just new array equals square brackets. Like that's just how we create an array. Or you can do a new array equals array.new, capital A. So if I wanted to insert some data, there are 2 different methods I can use to insert data into my array. Again, I have, let's take a look at this one down here. So I have an array. This is just the variable equals to square brackets. There's these 2 less than signs. They're called shoveling. Almost everyone calls it shoveling. So I'm going to shovel stuff into an array. So if I have an array, it's empty, and I'm going to shovel the number 1 into it. Now my array has the number 1. If I shovel the number 2 into it, my array is going to be 1, 2. And these are always going to be in the order that you tell it to do. The other method to insert data into an array is called push. So if I do array equals array.new and I push 1 into it, it's the same thing as shovel, one or the other. It's your call which one you want to do. At this point, my array is going to have 1. Next, if I push 2, my array is going to have 2 inside of it.
So those 2 less than signs, put it in there?
Yep. Yep. These 2 do the same thing. It's just, do you prefer dot push or do you prefer 2 less than signs? Most people will tell you the 2 less than signs because I can type 2 things versus 5 things. Push plus the dot. It's whatever works for you.
Can you go back 1 second? I'm sorry.
Sure.
So the difference between the 2, when you push 1 into it, you need parentheses up top, but on the bottom, if you're shoveling in, you just put 1.
Yep.
Okay. So more than 5 things.
Yeah, there is a different thing. So we're not going to do you try. You're just going to yell at me and tell me what to do.
Yeah. So let's say that you do the push method,
Mm-hmm.
or when you first, or let's say when you actually assign, when you actually create the array,
Mm-hmm.
is this basically like an open? You can add as many things as possible, or can you give that array limitations as to what you can add?
You can add whatever you want to an array.
So, like, can you make a limitation on that array, like only 5 things? You can, are those limitations possible?
You can totally do something like that. You can say like until, like if you were to create like, let's say you're a school administrator and you have a bunch of buses, right, like that, and you can only have 30 kids on a bus, right? Like if you were to represent that in terms of like arrays or something like that, you can say like until the array's length, or like until there are 30 objects inside of this array, keep filling it in. Once that's done, then we got to get another bus.
And then if you want to add more than 1 thing, you just separate it by a comma.
Yeah, let's try that. All right, so built into, why is my computer dying? Gosh. Well, we'll find out when it blows up. All right, so built into every single quit out of this. Hold on one second. Let me figure out what is going on my computer. Zoom is using a bunch of stuff. Okay, it's just Zoom. Not an issue. Built into everybody's computer, there's something called IRB. This is an interactive Ruby console. You can similarly, like if you were to go to like any Google Chrome and then right-click and go to inspect element, there's a JavaScript console. Every single computer has something called IRB that's built in, which is a Ruby console. So I'm going to have, let's just create a array of names. So we'll just call this echoes equals empty array. So echoes, I want to, let's say I want to add in everybody's name. So I'm going, so just tell me what to do. Push. Yep.
And then you want to put it in strings.
Sure.
Danny.
All right, we got Danny. We'll do Raymond, and we'll do Sharif for now. So now when I look at echoes, I have an array. It has 3 things inside of it: Danny, Raymond, and Sharif. Now you can kind of see I've put in 3 at once. I could also just do .push with Aaron, just one person. I can also do echoes.push Leanna without the parentheses. That will also work. There's like a lot of like small little intricacies that you're going to need to, unfortunately, just kind of play with. What was the other way that I could shove in like stuff into this array? Less than. What's that also called? Shovel. All right. So I'm going to put in Sarah. Uh-oh. What happened? What's that? No quotes. All right. So we have an error that's showing up on the screen, and whenever that shows up, sometimes people freak out. But don't worry too much. It usually gives you exactly what you need. Name error. Okay. Undefined local variable or method Sarah for this main object. Oh, I look up here. Sarah is actually a variable. Sarah is not actually being put in as a string. I just need to change that. Now we have Sarah, and maybe I'm going to see if this could work. We will put in Kimberly and Michael. I don't know if this works. We'll find out. Nah, they don't like it. It's only one thing at a time. Kimberly, and finally Michael.
What about if you put like double quotes and then quotes on the name? No.
I don't think so. Let's try it. What did you say? So double quotes on the names?
Double quotes on like right after the shovel, double quotes.
Okay.
And close the double quotes after you write all the names, and then single quotes on everything.
Okay.
Like this?
Yeah.
This is going to be saved as one string with. It's just going to be saved as one string. So you'll see Danny, Raymond, blah, blah, blah. And then the last one is literally just a string of 3 names strung together.
Shoveling can only be one element at a time?
We can, with the shovel, it seems like you can only add in one element at a time. The push, you can add in multiple elements at a time. So if I do echoes push, you can do 3 things like that. The shovel is not so forgiving. All right, so now I have way too many people. Let's kind of get rid of a few. Let's jump into Ruby Docs. Ruby Docs is the place that you want to go for all things Ruby. So this is the official documentation for the entire language, but if you kind of start looking through this page, you'll quickly get very, very overwhelmed because I'm like, okay, I'm on 2.5, and there's a whole bunch of stuff I don't understand, and I'm freaking out. Like, that's okay. You don't need to be on this particular site like this. So I'm just going to look up Ruby array methods. Just Google that. The one that you want to trust is anything that says rubydoc.org. Ruby 2.2, okay, it might be a little out of date, but we will see what the methods are. They're all here on the left-hand side. Right now, I have an array that's way too big. I want to just dumb it down to just these first few people. So first things first, I want to see how many we have because I think we have way too many extra things. So looking here on the left, I'll scroll real slow. can you find a method that might work to account? Sure. Where is that? All right. So I clicked on it. It comes down here. I have an array with 1, 2, 4, 2. Array.count is 4. Okay, I think that might work. Let's try that. So we have echoes.count. We have 12 things. Okay, that's too much. We only have 8 students. Has anyone heard from Kelsey Beard? Anybody? Okay. Right now we have officially 9 students, but maybe we have 8. So let's get rid of these last 4 right over here. How do we get rid of, inside of JavaScript, how do you get rid of the last element in an array? What's that?
-1.
The last one, yep.
Pop or unshift?
Which one? Pop and unshift do 2 different things. It's pop, yep. So I'm going to do echoes.pop. What gets returned to me is the last thing that's on the page, last thing that's inside the array, and my remainder is now, echoes.count is now 11 things. Obviously, I don't want to do this another 3 times and just, like, that's not a programmatic way. I mean, you could do it. You just pop 3 more times and then it's gone. But I want to be a little bit more programmatic. Is there a method over here that could do something for me?
Is there a remove -1?
Remove? Is there a remove? Like, maybe there is. I don't see remove. I know what you're saying. I know what you're going for. Maybe there's something else, though.
Maybe under pop.
Last.
There's a special.
Maybe there's a special instance of pop. Hey, looks like there's something. So I've got pop the first time and pop 2. Okay, so it looks like pop can take a number of arguments. So I'm going to pop. I want to get down to 8 students. So how many do I have to pop off?
8.
Okay, so we have echoes. Now we have echoes.count. There's 8 of you, and there everybody is. Now you can kind of see if I scroll all the way up here, like as I was adding people, the index remained the same. Like I didn't have to change, like nothing changed. I can always rely on the same order that I pushed it in to be the same order that it's always going to be. And the reason behind this is because arrays in particular are like, they rely on indexes. Every single one of these things relies on a particular index. It's always going to be in that particular spot. How does array counting work, Sarah?
What do you mean? How does it work? Like stepping through?
Yeah, like how does like if I wanted to access the first element of the array, of echoes, how do I access this first name, Danny?
Zero.
0. Yep. So the weird part, which I don't really appreciate, but you just kind of have to get used to, is that counting when it comes to computers most of the time starts at 0 because 0 is technically the first number. So it's not like if I wanted to do like echoes, like, oh, the first thing of echoes, so I could just do like echoes 1. Surprise, it's actually the second thing in the array because the second number in like a computer's mind is actually 1. So counting always starts at 0. So if I wanted to access the first thing, it's always going to be echoes at 0. How do I get the last thing in the array? I could do -1 because arrays also go around the other way. It goes all the way to the end and then starts all the way over. It's kind of like a circular thing. So you start off at 0, your -1 thing is the last thing in your element. It's nice and confusing and backwards. Or you can just find the length of something. So if echoes has 8 things in there, I can just do echoes of 7. Just like whatever the last -1.
So if you don't know the length, then -1 is the best way to find the last thing.
Yep, absolutely, yeah. So -1 will always get you the last thing, and it's much faster than doing something like echoes at echoes.length -1. Because then your computer has to calculate the length, then it has to subtract 1, and then it has to find the and then it will search inside of there. So that's not exactly the greatest. This is not very performant, but don't worry about performance for right now. The amount of times that you'll actually need to worry about performance is not very large. We'll just put it that way. All right, let's jump out of here for a second. Let's cover hashes, and then we'll be done. So hashes inside of Ruby look like this. So A is equal to 1, B is equal to 2, or something like that. This is called a Ruby hash. Inside of JavaScript, it's called an object, and inside of Python, I just learned yesterday, is called a dictionary. So there are 3 ways to represent the same thing. These are just a collection of key value pairs. So objects and hashes and all that, whatever you would decide to call it, they hold sets of key value pairs in the same way that a dictionary, if you were to open like actual paper dictionary, all they do is they hold words and their meanings. Like a dictionary at its very core is just a giant book of words and meanings. I look up the word apple, I'll get a response of some sort of, like, apple is like a fruit, typically red or something like that. Values are going to be assigned to different keys. So let's jump over to JavaScript just so we keep things interesting. Actually, we'll just go here. No, we'll go here. All right, let's create pet names. So we'll just call this let pet names and owners equals some sort of empty hash, empty object, since we're talking about JavaScript. An has a pet?
I do.
You do? All right. So let's do that. So we're gonna create an object with Michael as the owner and his pet name as the key. So Michael, what is your pet's name?
Rocky.
Rocky. Oh, sorry. Michael equals Rocky. So I've added, this is the way that you can add something to a JavaScript object. So I have an empty, like an empty object to begin with, and then I'm assigning a key to go to a specific value. So if I type in pets, pet names, and owners, at this time, I'm going to get a result back. Michael has a pet named Rocky. Who else has a pet?
One quick question.
Sure.
In this case, could you not have quotes with Michael?
Let's try it. Let's find out. Like this?
Yes.
What do you think?
I think no.
Why?
Because it changed color from red.
Because it changed color from red. That is a legitimate thing to think about. Sure. Michael, at this point, because Michael's not in a string, Michael's actually a variable. And Michael is not going to have a variable, and it's going to blow up and say, Michael is not defined.
I feel like I've seen it both ways where the keys are quotes around them and not with quotes around them.
So when you enter it, it has to be in quotes. If you take a look right here, it's just kind of like this key doesn't appear to be a string anymore, right? I think it still is. Let's see. So let's try Michael like this. So I'm at this point, I'm going to try to access it. Michael is not defined. I still have to put Michael inside of strings in order to access that particular thing.
Can you use integers?
Can I use integers? So you mean, can I do pet owners 1 equals dog or something like that?
Yeah.
I could. It appears that I can. So if I do pet names and owners of 1, it gives me dog. But 1 is not a terribly descriptive key. Then you want to, like, your job is to make like all data as, I guess, reusable and user-friendly as possible. So this is how we are going to create like hashes. So if I were to do like, let's go back to this pets and owners. When I first created it, it was just an empty hash like this. This is how I created a new hash. Inside of Ruby, you can just do hash.new, or you can do the curly braces. It's totally up to you. Either one of those will work. Pets and owners, pet names and owners is basically a collection of key value pairs. The key is the left side of the colon. The right side of the colon is the value. Similarly, every single car has a VIN number. That would probably be its key. And the value is a specific make and model in year of a car. To access things inside of this key value pair, I put the name of pet names and owners, and then I have to actually give it the key. So you have to know what the actual key is. So in order to access Rocky, I have to do pet names and owners of Michael, because I need to know the key in order to access the value. Hashes are particularly useful when it comes to like searching for things, because they don't have to keep track of index. I'm going to type in pet names and owners 1,000 times. I guess it's keeping track of order for me, but it's not always going to keep track of order. It doesn't need to keep track of indexes. It's not like an array. Array needs to know like the thing at the 0th index is always going to be there every single time. When you talk about hashes, they don't necessarily rely on that type of order.
Quick question. Mm-hmm. Is probably updating the hashes. You just have to look up the method for that. Like if you want to add more.
We can totally add more. We'll add Aaron.
But let's say I wanted to, I got a pet goldfish or something like that, right? Or goldfish.
Sure.
So if I have a goldfish and also have a dog, so I want to update that with a dog, do I have to like completely have to include goldfish, or is there a method to just update that and add a dog to here?
Sure. So the question was, how do let's say I have a pet names and owners, and I'm Aaron. I have a goldfish right now, but I've decided, goldfish are boring, and I want to buy a real pet. No offense. I want to get like a pet with fur or something like that. I'm tired of fish. So the question was, how do I add on to this? So I know I can access it by just typing in pet owners at the key of Aaron, and I get goldfish back. But how do I make it so that I can add on to this? I think I just do plus equals and dog. So now if I look over here, Aaron is now goldfish and dog.
Oh, I'm sorry. I meant to, okay, so that's just a string literal, but okay, all right, I'll because I was looking at maybe if I had a goldfish and a dog.
Yeah.
That's an update that can be done as well, right?
You're meaning in 2 separate values.
Yeah.
Oh, you mean like, can I make this?
Yeah.
Oh, as of right now, this is string interpolation because I saved it as a string, but the value of Aaron could just be an array of things.
Okay,
so
I see.
with that, so the question, Aaron wasn't thinking of it as in terms of like I have a single string and I keep adding on to the string. He's like, what if I have a whole bunch of pets? And at that point, it's just kind of like a string might not be the best thing for you.
Right.
The next best data type for that would probably be an array. So at that point, let's kill all of Aaron's pets. So we're going to do Aaron. The pets of Aaron is now going to be equal to an empty array. So now if I go to pet names and owners, you can kind of see like Michael has Rocky, but Aaron has an array of pets, and that array has nothing in there. So now at this point, I'm going to basically push some stuff in there. I'm pretty sure it's .push for this. I'm just going to say goldfish and see what happens. And then I'll push in dog and then cat. So if I go look at pet names and owners, I can see that Michael has Rocky, Aaron has an array of 3 things. So let's take a look at what Aaron actually has. It's an array, has 3 things in there. It has a goldfish, a dog, and a cat. Like, so I would recommend at this point, like if you're going to have like multiple animals you're removing and adding and things like that, you might want to look into having an array instead. All right. So we covered quite a bit of stuff this morning. We covered the basics of Ruby. We covered this for-in loop. We covered how to solve this Roman numerals. We talked about arrays in both JavaScript and Ruby. Like the things I talked about are going to apply to both languages. And we talked quickly about, you know, Ruby hashes, JavaScript objects, Python dictionaries, like whatever you want to call it. This curly brace collection of key value pairs. Are there any questions before? Are there any questions? Period. Remote, anything?
What would be the big advantage of a hash?
Yeah, so there's the largest advantage of a hash is that key value pairs are unique. So that means that you can't have duplicate keys. Inside of arrays, you can have duplicate values. In addition, like since hashes don't, like JavaScript objects hashes, they don't rely on indexes, searching through them is extremely fast. We're talking much faster. Like if I were to look up like a specific car in a gigantic list that's an array, I would have to go through each individual one until like the VIN number that I look for matches up with that particular VIN number because they keep track of indexes. But when I search through a hash, because I don't have to worry about indexes, it's just a bunch of key value pairs, the searching process is much faster. Cool. Let me stop recording. Right. Actually, question.
On the watching code,
Mhm.
he does an array, like it. I mean, he does a lot of stuff, but the basis of it is an array of objects.
Mhm.
Is there a certain situation where you want to do that, or that's?
Sure. It's kind of like we're using Airtable, which is an online like spreadsheet that's actually also acts as a database. So like I will have access. You can kind of think of your class as an array of people, right? Each one of you have a birth date, you know, have a address, an email address, a GitHub handle, like all of that kind of stuff. There's information about you that should be saved inside of an object. So for us specifically, if we had like echoes equals this, then I could do like echoes equals an array of people. So if I did echoes dot push, I'm going to push in a person. All right, let's do name is going to be Danny. DOB is, just give me the month and the year. 2 Feb 1989. Okay, so now if I take a look inside of echoes, let's just do echoes at 0. I have like an array of objects. This object tells me a lot of stuff. It tells me I have a person named Danny. Date of birth is February 1989. I could keep adding on to this as well. So having an array of objects is actually quite useful.
Like if you have a file with like, do you have a file with that? Like if you want a file with everyone in here, like all our information, you could put in an array.
You could put in an array, yeah. It's like, yeah, that's a good use for it. Cool. I'm gonna stop recording at this time.